Hmm. Man. Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and I just got done watching episode 9 of the anime series Centaur no Nayami, or A Centaur's Life, or A Centaur's Worries. My anime list is not very decisive on which of those two, titles, translation titles, is actually correct. Probably both. I don't know. For anyone who has watched this particular show, as was brought to my attention by a friend of mine over on Facebook, I have to thank you for giving me the heads up ahead of time what I was going to be getting into with the latest episode, episode 9 of this show, because there was definitely a tonal shift from the series norm, which is very sort of lighthearted and tongue-in-cheek and humorous. And although, as my friend and I have talked about the show in the past, I've been doing write-ups sporadically, covering it over on Facebook. We have both been sort of cursorily aware of the fact that there has been a dark undertone in certain episodes to the surrounding societal framework of the show, which is largely just an offshoot of our own real world, but with a bunch of fantasy-esque races and things making up the populace. You have centaurs, as the title suggests. You have angel folk and merfolk and amphibian folk and that kind of thing. Mer people, as the name suggests. And snake people who are from Antarctica for some reason. And it's usually coy, it's lighthearted, it's fun. Sometimes they handle slightly more dramatic theming and such like that, but nothing at all pales in comparison to this episode, which kind of sort of was like the best sort of equating I can put forth in words is to the experience I had watching Schindler's List. And I'm not making light of the subject matter in this episode by any stretch of the imagination. I was looking over some posts over on my anime list after watching the episode of people who have also watched it. And I feel like, just based on maybe the 6 or 7 posts I'd seen, I feel like there is some aspect of this episode that has been lost on people. And that's very much what inspired my wanting to do a video discussing it. I had no plans to stop everything I was doing. Still got one other anime episode I need to watch to catch up for the week, as of Sunday night, the time of this, or rather Monday night, the time of this recording. I had no intention of actually wanting to discuss the show, but I was very much motivated to by the subject matter, by the weightiness, the gravitas that encompassed it, as well as because I feel like a chief value of the episode has seemingly been missed by at least a small handful of its viewers and people who have been watching the show and continuing to watch the show. We start this episode, and at first I didn't know quite how I felt about the fact that we're introduced to this, amphibian folk character, Jean Rousseau, he's like a frogman. One of the girls, actually, one of the main cast, calls him Frogman. And another one of them says, I don't know if I would call him that. That might be ist, racist or whatever. And then the snake girl, whose name escapes me, is like, oh, well, if I were going to refer to him, I'd refer to him as a Frenchman. Now, that immediately rose my eyebrows, because I'm like, that's actually kind of a slur against French people, calling them a frog. And I mean no offense by that, I'm just observing that fact, but that gave me pause. And I'm like, okay, what kind of episode is this going to be? We're already off to a rollicking start with that. But the entire first half of the episode shifts to focus on the life of Jean Rousseau, this frog man, or amphibian folk, to be politically correct. And his business doings, the things he does, he travels and everything, and he's going to be having a meeting with this angel folk elderly man who's like a business CEO, and he also is going to go visit his tribes people, which is kind of allegorical to like African tribesmen. And if you kind of think of, here is somebody who was taken out of his country, he was educated in the Western world, and then he goes back and his own people are going to look sort of condescendingly down upon him. And that's kind of what's going on here. He doesn't spend his time with his people, so his people think he must be high and mighty, he must think better of himself. He's coming into our territory just because he happens to be like us, kind of. And he's going to tell us how to run our military. He's going to tell us that we have to get along with people. When he's not here, he doesn't see how these people treat us. In this case, the mammalians, the mammal-based species of this world, angel folk and centaurs and all that kind of stuff. There's apparently some rough relations going on between them. And so here comes this, amphibian folk guy who lives apart from this localized tribe. And they don't like the fact that he's coming in and telling them how they have to conduct themselves and that they need to be peaceable, and that, the way they consider it, he doesn't understand what we go through when he's not around. So don't come preaching to us about how we deal militarily with forces that might oppose us. You don't have the right to speak on that because you're not around. And so we see kind of that framework. And then he happens to be going to the school that the main girls are a part of, and he's going to give like a lecture or a speech or whatever. And they give him some hot tea, and that's the end of the first half of the episode. Now, the second half of the episode is the Schindler's List half. Oh my God, we're watching this world's version of the Holocaust unfolding for all intents and purposes. We are introduced to this angelic boy, this angel folk boy, who is about to be murdered in a lineup of people who might as well be Jewish to the, Nazi regime who is gunning them down. And because they met their death quota for the day, just to give you an idea of the completely blindsiding tonal shift just from the first half of the episode, they're going to spare his life. But he gets put into a sort of work camp, a concentration camp, work camp, where he works or he dies. And you can't get any more palpable than that. And then there's infighting with the people who are also contained within the work camp. These people are seen as livestock, as no better than just doing the hard labor. And it's the tension is through the roof, And so we see that this kid is he's trying to be the peaceable bridge between some of the infighting centaurs and otherwise. And there's one particular guard who is getting the hell beaten out of him because he's in Flynn with some of the soldiers, the sort of Nazi regime-esque soldiers. And he gets a little more food than they do, so they don't like him, and then they're going to beat him, and this kid wants to try to stop them. And so this guy sees the promise of this boy because he's beholden to compassion. And so at one point when he's about to pass out, breaking rocks in this gravel pit, that particular guard guy comes over and he takes him behind a barn and he's like, I'm going to beat the hell out of you. But he doesn't. He makes a show of being that's what he's doing, but he feeds the kid his leftovers. And he says, if anyone's going to survive out of this, it's got to be you. You're the younger one. My days are numbered. They're going to either kill me or the guards will or whatever. And this kid cries and he feeds himself. He gets renewed energy and he gets back to work. And then the Allied forces come in. And he is spared again, just barely. They've apparently gone and murdered the guy who helped him for being an air quotes traitor. But the soldier who finds the boy when they're chasing after him and wanting to kill the boy as well as being a traitor, because one of them actually witnessed this soldier, this guard guy feeding him, and he must have been in with them and everything like that. This soldier wards them off, firing off his weapon, and saves this kid's life, gives him a candy bar, and apparently raises him. And the point that was, I think, lost on some people watching comes at the very end when we circle back around to the meeting with Jean Rousseau, the amphibian folk guy, the frog guy. It turns out this child is that CEO he's having a meeting with. And the whole point of this latter half of the episode was because that CEO has an angel folk servant who doesn't understand how he could shake the hand of the amphibian folk who is seen as being lesser, a lesser person. This servant is telling this to a CEO who was treated like a second-class citizen, livestock, whose very life was in jeopardy. He had to work in a labor camp, persecuted as the Jews were by the Nazis. And this guy can't understand why he tells the amphibian folk, Jean Rousseau, to take off his glove and shake his hand. Because at least for the assistant of the CEO, it's kind of gobsmacking, like, well, aren't they dirty? Aren't they different than us? Aren't they dirty? And this was the reasoning why the CEO did not share this contempt, did not share this discriminatory outlook. In spite of our differences, we're all the same. The visual differences, whether it be the race we have, where we originate in the world, we're really all the same. And it was just like, holy, pardon my French, holy shit. Because this is the last thing I would have expected from a show like this. It was so stark and so depressing and so shocking, and then so meaningful in its finale, in its culmination, when everything finally came to fruition and you saw that the second half, the darker aspect of this episode, had very much to do with the slightly lighter-hearted first half, which both themselves was completely at arm's length from anything this show has thus far been. I'm all worked up, even just talking about it, even just remembering it, from moments before I turned on my camera to record. It chokes me up. It plays to my empathy, to my sympathies, to my own worldview that can't wrap its head around racism and discrimination and hate and disdain. I didn't expect, even after having been given the heads up by my friend on Facebook, that this was unlike anything we've seen thus far from this show. I didn't expect what this amounted to. I couldn't have expected it or predicted it in a million years. And so I felt it was highly worth discussing, highly worth delving into, because I felt again like some people were missing the point that this old man, this was the suffering, this was what he grew up out of. This was why he did not hold the same contempt his own servant did in the modern day for someone who was different. It's analogous to a Jewish Holocaust survivor grasping willingly the hand of an African American, where their servant is sort of racially biased and doesn't get how they are or should be on the same level playing field. That was the point. That was the gist. That was the overall message, is that you shouldn't look down on anyone because we're all the same. Differences, as Star Trek, made abundantly apparent, was its onus. infinite diversity and infinite combinations should be celebratory. But unfortunately, that's also not always realistic. It is down to how we the individual interpret that message and how we apply it to our lives. Do you want to go out and be a bigot? Do you want to go out and hate? Do you want to discriminate? Or do you want to be welcoming? Now, unfortunately, as a side effect of the world we live in, you have to be cautious. There's no wrongdoing or ill-doing in being cautious, but to be out and out discriminatory or judgmental of the unlike, unfamiliar, is just wrong. And the whole poignancy of this episode was to say this is who that angel folk boy grew up to be, and this was why he was so accepting of this amphibian folk man. Because he got it. He understood. So that's really all I have to say about this particular episode. It was definitely one for the history books, I think, because it came out of nowhere as far as the traditional sort of framework of this show. And it hit me out of left field. I was thunderstruck and gobsmacked completely and utterly by it. And I would highly recommend, if you haven't been watching this show, you don't even have to bother watching the rest of it, but seek out episode 9. Just to see how it plays off your own perspective on things. And if you have seen it, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. It was definitely highly, highly impactful, to say the least. And so, yeah, otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.